Namaste children, how are you? I hope that you are all well. And today we are going to learn about the topic energy from the sun. The energy from the sun and how the energy helps for the earth or the people as we are living on the earth, how it helps us and what is energy and how many forms are there, what kind of forms are there, and how this energy develops us, in what way it develops us, all these things we are going to learn today. That and again, see, as we know, my dear, earth consists of the full diversity. So there are different kinds of forms are there on the earth. Basically, in previous lesson, we learnt already all these aspects of diversities in the form of oceans, continents, mountains, and regions of high and scanty rainfall. And in this lesson, we are going to learn about the diversity which we cannot see but feel. So diversity, what that is nothing but temperature. So today we are going to learn about the temperature. How many types of temperatures are there? There are two. Generally, we may think that temperature is nothing but heat or hot. No. Cool is also one of the element of temperature. So that is the cool and hot. And because of this, there are so many diversities. For example, if you observe, whenever we wake up in the morning, generally we feel somewhat cool, and night also we feel somewhat cool, and during daytime that is seem to be somewhat hot. And some months of the year we used to treat them or talk them about that these are winter months, are nothing but cool months, and these are summer months. And why such kind of diversity takes place on the earth? We are all living on the earth, our planet, but there is a difference. And even if you observe some regions or some places on the earth there, and some countries are call them as cold countries, and some countries are which receives more warmness, we call them the warm countries. And we know very well that the equatorial region, that is warm throughout the year. It's a warm, nothing but it receives more heat throughout the year. And whereas polar region concerned, that is cold throughout the year, they feel somewhat cold. Here, and these call them as poles, northern pole and southern pole. And these areas, they possess the temperature, very low temperature, nothing but we call them as frigid zone or cold zones. And what about the equatorial region? So here, see, equatorial region, generally the people who are living nearby equatorial region, and they receive more temperature. So that's why Such region we call it as warm region. And if you move on the important topic regarding this temperature concern that even winds and rains also, and it affects or it influences the temperature, influences the winds and rains of particular area, and based on the temperature, some winds may treat them as hot winds, may treat them as cold winds, and some areas they receive more rainfall and scanty rainfall. So this temperature, it determines the rain of the place, and how much the rainfall is receiving by that particular area. And another feature, if you observe, that the temperature and rainfall affect the life of the people, or influences the people's life in a critical way, and the people who have cold, a modern climate or modern temperature generally, and they work more hours for their development. But whereas take for example India is a tropical monsoon type of climate, we may not work hours together because of our temperature as it is somewhat hot. And regarding plants and animals concerned, these also they depend on the heat and water. Some plants will grow on hot regions, and some plants will grow in cold regions. And some animals we can see where there is water, and if at all not there the water, then we cannot see these animals or forests also. So by that we can get a conclusion that see, we have variation in temperature in different parts of the world. There are so many diversities. So let us move on at the basic aspect or basic content of the lesson, that solar energy and sun's rays. Solar energy and sun's rays. So here there is one picture, and this is artificial environment for plants. So interestingly, the human beings, they are trying to grow crops everywhere by creating artificial environment for plants, and without the solar energy. And see, we can grow the vegetables and fruits in very cold regions by building greenhouses. So this is a greenhouse which are created by the man. Such we call it as artificial environment. So let us move on the important topic, solar energy and sun's rays. Solar energy and sun's rays. And what is solar energy? What is meant by energy? So regarding this, the sun is the principal source of energy. Sun is the principal or major or primary source of energy on Earth's surface, and it is like a powerhouse which generates and gives out energy in the form of light and heat. Now, my dear children, tell me what it gives. What are the forms of solar energy? There are Solar energy are two kinds. One is it generates light and as well as heat. So light we know very well that, and so as we know that it is a principal resource of energy. And here another topic we move on. What is a radiation? What is a radiation? What is a radiation? For example, if a boy comes and says that I am so energetic, what is meant by that? What is meant by that? So he is so fit physically and mentally also. And even radiation means the energy produced by body, we call it as radiation. The energy produced by a body or which gives out energy is known as radiation. And here the topic is solar radiation. The energy constantly emitted by the sun. The energy constantly emitted by the sun is known as solar radiation. So earlier we discussed that radiation only. Radiation is the body which produces energy is nothing but radiation. But whereas solar radiation is the energy which produced by sun or which emitted by the sun, which gives out by the sun, and such we call it as solar radiation. So what are the forms of energy? So we discussed that solar radiation and energy we can see and feel like heat, light and heat. However, we receive many other forms of So these are the other forms of energy from the sun, that is UV rays, ultraviolet rays, radio waves, and as well as X-rays. And besides that, heat and light. And we have to remember one important point, that the energy radiated by the sun is more or less constant with little variation. It's very important. Then why such when there is no variation the solar energy, and why such variation takes place in the world? So these we call them as these cold countries, coldest countries, cold area, frigid zone, but whereas this is warm zone. And why such thing happen concern? And if you move on, and what causes the changes in temperature on the earth? What are the causes or what are the factors for taking such kind of changes regarding the temperature concern? And here if you want another concept, that is insulation. What is insulation? What is insulation? The solar radiation receives on the surface of the earth. The solar radiation so see, incoming solar radiation. So what is solar radiation? We'll already learned that the energy which comes from the sun, and this solar radiation receives by the earth. The radiation which receives by the earth, which we call it as insolation. What is insolation, my dear? The radiation which receives by the earth from the sun is known as radiation. And here you observe regarding this is very very important. And are we receiving the 100% of energy or radiation which is emitting by the sun? No. Only some portion of energy only we are receiving from the sun. Remaining, it reflects again to the atmosphere. And how much percentage of the solar radiation is reflected to the atmosphere concerned? That is, 1/3 of solar energy is reflected back by Earth's atmosphere. Back one third of so the insolation, and 1/3 of solar energy reflected back by Earth's atmosphere, and some portion scattered and absorbed by the atmosphere. See here, and some portion, the 6% of the solar energy scattered from the atmosphere. And rays like UV, they won't reach the ground because of it. Because of that, as ultraviolet rays are very powerful, as they are not reaching the surface of the earth. Because of that, it makes possible the humankind to live on the earth, to lead the life on the earth. And even some are absorbed or reflected away by clouds and smoke or dust in the atmosphere. See here, and 19% absorbed by the atmosphere and clouds, and 20% scattered and reflected by clouds. Okay, 51% absorbed by the sun, and 4% reflected by the surface. And I think you would have noticed that on cloudy days, that it doesn't get very hot. The temperature is very low, because sometimes the energy which comes from the sun, and it reflected to the clouds, and it absorbed and scattered. So that is the distribution of this solar energy, and these are very important to get an understanding about the sun's rays and solar energy. Another important concept regarding this solar energy concern: what is the impact of sun's rays and the earth's surface, and how it influences, and what is the relation between the sun's rays and as well as earth's surface. And even the sun's rays that reach the ground do not hit the earth's surface uniformly. So earth rays are not evenly distributed on the earth's surface. We had already learned about this. In some areas or some regions of the world, they are receiving more temperature, and some areas they are receiving the less and scanty temperature. And why such difference? Why such variation is taking place? Here diagrammatically they are explained how much insulation is being received by the earth, and how much is reflect to these clouds, and as well as atmosphere and earth surface, and all these things. This was explained through the diagrammatically. This is a good information. And if you observe that why some regions are receiving more temperature, and why some regions are receiving less temperature on particular day itself, because of its curved nature. What is that? Because of the curved nature of the earth's surface, there is no uniformity in the earth's receiving of insolation by the sun. And what is the curved nature considered? We know very well that earth is of curved in nature or spherical in shape. Spherical in shape. And here if you observe the equator, they receive more temperature. Why? Because, and this is this North Pole and South Pole, and which are somewhat far away from the equator, they receive less temperature. And why such thing happen concern? The sun rays or insolation or sun rays, they fall on the equator at the degree of 90 degrees angle. 90 degrees angle. To make you understand, we can say that they straightly fall on the equatorial region. Because of that, they receive heavy temperature. And whereas if you move on to polar regions, and they receive less temperature. And such we call it as, once again, so equator receives more solar radiation, the risk falls 90 degrees, but whereas they fall slanting or they somewhat bend or slow towards the pole. This process we call it as angle of incidence. I would like to ask you, my dear children, is angle of incidence is more in Japan or Russia? So this is Japan, you know very well. This is Japan, this is Russia. Now tell me, which country possesses the high intensity of this angle of incidence? Generally, if we compare between Russia and Japan only it receives, because it is nearby the equator. It is far away from equator as well as it is nearby. Russia is nearby a polar region. And to make you understand, here we got one table they depicted. Let's see, if the insolation received at the equator 0 degrees is 100 units, and at 45 degrees, that is northern Japan, and they received 75 units are received, 75 units of insolation. And whereas at 66 and of polar circle, they received 50 units are 50 received. And at 90 degrees north and south poles, 40 units are received. Now let us have a look here. So northern Japan, how much they received? 75 units. Okay. So that is what's its longitude? At the 45 degrees of longitudes. And if you move to Arctic Circle, so this is Arctic Circle, and that is 66 and of east longitudes, and they receive 50 units of insolation. And whereas here, if we move on, this 90 degrees of northern pole and as well as southern pole, and they receive only 40 units. Because by that we can get an understanding that the area which receives the insolation at the degree of 90, and they receive more insolation. And if it's slant, if the rays becomes slant or bends, and they receive less insolation. And here I would like to ask you one question. Where will sun rays fall more intensively, in Andhra Pradesh or Rajasthan? Andhra Pradesh or Rajasthan? Certainly we can say that. That is Rajasthan only. Rajasthan only. And next some important things. See here, another important. And to make you understand, we have got another important picture or diagram, how the impacts of this angle of incidence. See here, when there is a short distance from the sun, so where is the short distance? So near equator, this is equator, and intensity will be more, angle of incidence will be more, because the shortest distance. And if you move to here, see the polar region, so there is a long distance, and angle of incidence will be less. So by that we can understand insolation, in which area insolation is more, in which area insolation is less concerned. We can get an idea that the area which is nearby the equator, the area which is nearby the polar region, such area receives less insolation, whereas the equator more insolation. So see the angle of incidence. Once again, the angle of incidence is nothing but the angle at which the sun rays falls on the earth's surface, which we call it as angle of incidence. Today we had learned about two important topics, that earth, the energy from the sun, and what kind of diversities are there, as we already discussed, and how this temperature is different, and why temperature is different in the day and as well as night, and in some months, in some regions, and why equatorial region called as warm region, polar region as cold, and how this temperature and rainfall affects, and what are the sun's rays, solar energy. The energy which emitted by the sun is nothing but solar energy, and the radiation, the energy which is produced by the body, or the energy constantly emitted by the sun, so radiation, and insolation, the solar radiation receives on the surface of the earth, such call it as sun's insolation. And we have discussed how much it reflects. Is earth receives the 100% of insolation which is emitted by the sun concerned? We learned that not 100%, but 1/4 is reflected back to this atmosphere, and see atmosphere, clouds, and so there are so many facts are there, and here we call this greenhouse. Some solar radiation is reflected by the earth and the atmosphere. So see here the sun's rays in the form of radiation, and they are reflecting towards the atmosphere, towards clouds, and some other parts. So that's why we call it as see here we have got the percentage also we already learned, and this is, and why regarding these sun's rays and earth's surface concerned, one area is receiving more insolation and another area is receiving less insolation because of this curved nature of the earth. See, equator 90 degrees, and whereas these 45 and 45, and less intensity of this temperature, and this is long regarding distance also it is somewhat far away, whereas it is a short distance. And so these are the things we have learned today. So so this is very important topic, my dear. So remember, concentration on this.